All right. This is the, I think, seventh episode of the current Revolt podcast. Today I've got SREC member Rolando Garcia. Rolando, thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for considering me interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of people consider you interesting because of the recent shenanigans at the SREC meeting. When was it? Like last Saturday? It
Saturday,
was
yeah.
last Saturday. Wow. It feels like, I don't know why it feels like it was a month ago. So for those who don't know, the SREC met last weekend, last Saturday, to vote on whether or not they were going to not only censure state reps, but also consider penalizing them by removing them from the Republican ballot. And Rolando, you were a key part, I believe, and at least a key speaker in a lot of these decisions. Is that correct?
Yes, I was very vocal. I argued very strenuously, and the outcome was, in my view, I think the best possible outcome.
And that outcome was the fact that a lot of these reps did face penalties, but not the one that removed them from the ballot, right?
Correct. The ones that with the strongest censure cases were censured with some penalties, and those who were not, who had very weak censure cases, were not censured. And we did not use the ballot removal, ballot access penalty on any of those cases. And I think that was the correct result.
Now, there's a lot of grassroots activists and other people that were there and people that are just kind of viewing from the outside, not SREC members, that disagree with that. They feel that the SREC kind of capitulated to the White House, and we'll get into that discussion later, or maybe not, because I know it was executive session, and they that the SREC didn't follow through on promises made by either the RPT or county parties. Why do you think, or what do you feel like is the best argument for why you think this was the best outcome?
Well, I don't know what promises were made. I didn't make any promises about kicking people off the ballot. I don't know if people were making those promises, they were mistaken. We have to look at each censure resolution to see if it conforms with Rule 44, if the violations contained are actually Rule 44 violations. And then we have to decide, based on that, the appropriate penalty. Counties pass resolutions, but it's up to the SREC to decide whether this is whether these are correct, valid violations, and what the appropriate penalty is. And that's what we did. I do think that maybe there was a mistake in not managing expectations by some SRECs. I think there were a lot of activists out there who thought that Rule 44 is this magic wand that the party can wave to get rid of all the reps they don't like. And that has never been what Rule 44 was about. Rule 44 is the way it is structured makes it very difficult to censure people, makes it very difficult to apply these penalties. And it was never intended as a substitute for the primary. And if people had that mistaken impression, they may be disappointed. But I do want to your point about whether anyone capitulated. As you said, I can't discuss what was said or not said in executive session, but I can say with 100% certainty that what was or was not said or what happened in executive session did not change the outcome. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you weren't the only one that pointed this out. I believe Rohit Joy also mentioned this, that even if the White House hadn't reached out to the SREC or whatever that happened in the executive session, the outcome would have been the same. Do you feel that way as well?
Well, I don't just feel that way. I know that way, and we have a documented record. In order to impose penalty 3, you need a 3/5 majority of the SREC to vote for that penalty. That would be 39. At no point did they have 39 votes. We took one vote to strip penalty 3 before we even got to the resolutions, and we had 28 votes, which would have been enough to block penalty 3. And as we went through each resolution, we actually had a majority vote against penalty 3 on each of those resolutions. And many of those votes were taken before the executive session. And more than that, I mean, I talked to a lot of colleagues, had extensive conversations with colleagues in the days leading up to the meeting, and we shared the same concerns. And so again, I knew with 100% certainty that there were not 39 votes to impose penalty 3 on any of these. And I knew with about 80% certainty that there was an actual majority against penalty 3 on these cases. Now, that includes people who, some SRECs are just, they don't like Rule 44 at all. But it also includes people like me who support Rule 44 and penalty 3, but we didn't see any of these cases as meriting penalty 3.
Got it. Yeah, circling back to when I mentioned the promises that were made about potential removal of ballot, I attended myself several Republican meetings and club meetings. There was even a meeting I attended for the new YRs. What do they call the Texas Young Republicans or Young Republicans of Texas?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's one of them, one of the two new YRs, or one of the new, whatever the new YR is.
Right.
And you did have SREC members basically, maybe promise is the wrong word, but making very strong threats that they were going to remove these members from the ballot. And then the same members I saw making these threats ended up being some of the key speakers, kind of trying to talk it down and move away from censure. Or not censure, but remove away from penalty 3, I think is what they called it, the ballot removal.
Right.
And Abraham George, our chairman, or the Republican Party's chairman, I say our chairman because I identify as Republican, of course, but he seemed really keen on pushing these threats early on this year, and then as time came closer to this meeting, I noticed, and many other people noticed, that he was very much speaking against it and trying to talk it down. But I think the Grassroots and some of the SREC members kind of lost control of that narrative, and they seem to kind of want to run with it even without his approval.
Well, a couple things have happened. I think there was a lot of anger at the beginning of the session because of the speaker vote. And that's basically where all the censure thing comes from. Right. And I would argue that the speaker vote is not technically a Rule 44 violation, but even if you accept that it is, you still need 2 more. And that's why these resolutions were so weak. In other words, all anyone knew about was the speaker vote, and that's what they were upset about. And they're right to be upset. That was a horrible vote. But then they had to look. It was just a laundry list of a bunch of random, obscure votes that you have to make all these mental leaps to connect to a legislative priority or a principle. So when you say people made promises or there was threats, I would say 2 things happened that changed the political reality. One is the session was not as bad as everyone was expecting. I mean, unless you're Brian Harrison, But I mean, everyone who looks at this session realistically will say it would have been about the same if David Cook had been speaker. Okay, and we all know that. And I'm not excusing the vote because I think not having the speaker selected in the Republican caucus is going to create problems for us down the road. But at least in this session, what Dustin Burrows accomplished was pretty much what David Cook would have accomplished. And as many disappointments as there were, I think most reasonable people who actually engage with the legislature and who work to push our legislative priorities said, oh, it wasn't as bad as we thought. We actually got a few things through. It was actually better than it was 2 years ago. And the other thing that happened that I think changed the reality is the closed primary lawsuit. And when I say that there were... I think there were 2 big factors that persuaded SRCs to vote against it. One was the weakness of the resolutions itself, but the other was the worry about undermining the closed primary lawsuit. We are spending a lot of money on that. That I think as of a month ago it was like $200,000, but it's going to go much higher, much higher. But that's a fight that we have to win, and that's a fight that the delegates wanted. That last convention, the delegates said we want closed primaries ASAP. RPT is moving ahead on that, and Abraham, and God bless him, he's raising money for that expensive lawsuit because that's what the delegates want, and we need to do it. And I think a lot of SRECs thought, aside from the weakness of the resolutions themselves, thought this is not the time to go into a court battle on penalty 3 that we would likely lose, while we're also fighting this court battle on closed primaries. And please keep this in mind. Losing, and I cannot stress this enough, losing on penalty 3 because they're being argued on similar legal grounds, losing on a penalty 3 case, and we would have lost on one of these weak resolutions, would have undermined our closed primary case. I've tried to say this, Rachel Hooper tried to say this, so many people have tried to say this, And I think most SREC said, no, we have to prioritize closed primaries. We have to do that we cannot let anything slow down or undermine the closed primary case. And that was the reality.
So yeah, you mentioned, as far as like losing on these lawsuits, I think you were the one that brought up in one of the censures, and I don't remember who was against, but that the same penalty, the same votes that were being used to justify a censure against a rep were also made by Representative Mitch Little, and he wasn't up for censure. Is that true?
Yes. In fact, if you had accepted all of the violations included in the 10 censure resolutions that we were voting on Saturday, Mitch Little would have had 6 violations. Brian Harrison would have had 3 violations. When I say that everyone was upset about the speaker vote and then just trying to throw in a bunch of obscure votes to get to 3, that's what I'm talking about. And it had some votes that were very weakly connected to a legislative priority or a principle, or it had a vote that was just, they had, for example, one of the votes that was counted on a few of the resolutions was voting for HB 34. I said, okay, so I looked it up. Well, what does HB 34 do? It is a bill that prohibits government entities from investing in hostile nations like Iran, North Korea, Russia. And you think, oh, okay, well, that's a good bill. And it is a good bill, and every single Republican, including Brian Harrison, voted for it. And yet that was counted as a Rule 44 violation and grounds to kick someone off the primary ballot.
Why is that? If it's a good bill, why was it considered a violation?
Ask the counties that passed it. Okay, ask the counties.
It's very odd.
Yes, it is odd. When I say that these censures were weak, they were weak.
Do you feel like a lot of them were personality driven? I just don't like this guy, so I'm gonna try to make up the most.
That's definitely the case with Patterson. I think everyone knows what I said about Patterson, and he is just vile and nasty to precinct chairs and activists, and he absolutely is. His voting record wasn't really much different than a lot of the people that were not censured. In fact, it was a little bit better than some of the people that weren't censured.
Yeah.
I mean, his voting record isn't great, but it is not among the 10 worst of the House, or even among the 20 worst of the House. What's driving it is that he's just so vile and nasty to his activists. And in that regard, maybe he deserves it. I mean, it's like he's asking for censure. But to your point, yes, that part was at least a little bit personality driven.
Yeah, it almost felt like some of these reps maybe wanted the censure just so they can bring a court case against it. I think you had kind of alluded to a theory about that.
When I said that losing a case on closed primaries would on the ballot access would undermine closed primaries, that's what I meant. They wanted a lawsuit. They had raised millions of dollars for the legal fight. And their immediate objective, of course, was to nullify penalty 3. And we only get one shot at winning a court case on penalty 3. Had we lost it, then that would be totally off the table. Now, keep in mind, having it in the rules gives us leverage. It gives us a little bit of political leverage. And SRECs who are actually working during the session, working our legislative priorities during the session, would tell you this was on the minds of all the reps, the possibility of penalty 3. So losing the court case would take that off the table for penalty 3 and undermine closed primaries, and that is why I don't know. I mean, I can only speculate, but it felt like they were itching for a court fight.
Now it seems like the Grassroots is still pretty upset about the fact that nobody got removed from the ballot, and obviously the party and some of the party's activists and kind of their speakers are trying to do some damage control and get the Grassroots back on track, as so to say, and realize like, hey, this is actually the outcome we wanted. Do you think it's too late for that? Do you think the Grassroots are just gonna, are they gonna just be mad about this forever, or are they just gonna let this go, or are they gonna come around and be like, okay, yeah, we were wrong, like we shouldn't have done this?
I don't even agree when you say the Grassroots is upset about this. I think there's a very small segment of extremely vocal people who have for months tied their lives around censure and knocking certain reps off the ballot. Right. And they're very vocal. I do not sense that is the feeling among the general body of precinct chairs and people who go to convention. I sent an update to my convention delegates and precinct chairs in SD15, explaining everything that happened. I got several positive responses. I got 0 negative responses.
Interesting.
Now, Harris County is different. It may vary in different places, different parts of the state. But when you say, the grassroots is disappointed, the grassroots, when people who wanted penalty 3 claim that this is what the grassroots wanted, I think they're putting words in their mouths. Let's remember that the convention delegates voted to put penalty 3 as an option, as intended as a nuclear option. They did not pass a rule that said the SREC must impose penalty 3 whenever it is asked. They did not pass a rule saying that, the SREC must concur with every resolution a county sends to it. They did pass a rule saying that it's up to the SREC to evaluate what comes from the counties and to judge whether these are valid censures and to judge the appropriate penalties. And the SRECs, the majority of us, we are elected by the delegates, made that judgment per the rules. And so I'm very happy to defend it. Again, I know there are some people, very vocal people, who are upset, again, because I think there were some mistaken expectations. And to that extent, there are some people that are upset, and I don't know how long they'll be upset. I imagine tomorrow they'll find something else to be outraged about. But when you say the grassroots, I do not. Again, when I talk to precinct chairs and activists in Harris County, they're talking about who do we run for county judge? How do we take Harris County back? Look at what the judges are, all the criminals the judges are releasing. I think people have moved on, or at least a lot of activists have moved on to focusing on the primary, and how do we elect conservatives, more conservatives, to the state house. People who are obsessed over censure, I think they're very vocal, but I do not believe they represent the majority of the grassroots.
I think there was a lot of special interest in this too. I attended personal interest in these censures and these this threat of ballot removal. I attended the special meeting for the censure of Representative Jeff Leach, and it was led by the chairman of that committee in charge of censoring him was Matt Thorson, who I asked at the time if he was going to run. I think I asked him 2 weeks before that if he was going to run for Leach's spot. And he told me no. And then sure enough, I think, what was it? I think like 2 weeks after that meeting and after he chaired the committee censuring Leach, he decides he announces that he's running for Leach's spot. I find that pretty gross, actually. Like, if you're a chair, I feel like there's a lot of conflict interest there. And it's not just Thorson. There's quite a few, and I'm not going to name names, but there's people in the SREC that hold positions in ledge, or that have special interests in keeping members off the ballot, and they're either running for that person's spot, like Thorson is, yeah, or they work for an elected official. And I do think that's a conflict of interest.
It is, and to an outsider, I mean, again, to someone who does not whose life doesn't revolve around attending monthly EC meetings, to an outsider who says, "Oh, the precinct chair who convened the meeting to kick Jeff Leach off the ballot is running against him." That sounds like self-dealing, and it sounds like the sort of thing people hate about politics.
Yeah, it's very swampy. It's very swampy.
Yeah, it does look very swampy. Now, I don't know Matt Thorson.
Yeah,
I don't know him. So I will give him the benefit of the doubt that he didn't know he was going to run until a couple of weeks later. But I will know when we talk about people who are, when I say, we need to focus on electing more conservatives to the House. I did see that Matt Thorson was in attendance at that SREC meeting on Saturday. Okay. Yeah. Absentee ballots for the March primary go out in less than 3 months. That was a beautiful Saturday in the fall, perfect for block walking, perfect for attending an event in the district or even dialing for dollars. But he was spending that precious time sitting at an SREC meeting in Austin. Again, I don't know him. Maybe he is running a serious campaign. I don't know, but that did not give me a good feeling, and that says a lot about, I think, those grassroots. And again, it's not the majority of them. It is a narrow section of them whose lives revolve around this sort of procedural infighting, rather than actually doing the hard work of recruiting and supporting conservative primary challengers. I hope Matt Thorson runs a serious campaign. I think the people in that district deserve a good conservative alternative, and I hope that Matt Thorson lives up to it. But I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, I was kind of cracking up today because there's another person running for Leach's spot, but in 2028. Like, he announced his run this year for 3 years from now. His name is Brandon Burden. And he got an endorsement today from Representative Steve Toth. And I was talking to a colleague of mine, and the colleague had mentioned, do you think Toth knows that this guy's running his election in 2028 and not this cycle against Representative Leach? Like, I don't know. I reached out. I text Toth. He didn't respond yet, but I text Toth. I was like, were you aware that this endorsement you gave is 3 years from now, not current? So who knows? But what was extra funny was, I'm in a lot of these grassroots, quote unquote, groups on Facebook, and somebody posted a link or an article bragging about Brandon Burden's endorsement from Toth, and Thorson's people were on there getting upset. They're like, "You're muddying the waters. He's not running this time. Like, he's running 3 years from now." Like, and so like the Thorson people were fighting with the Burden people, but they're united against Leach. And I ended up posing the question. I was like, okay, but if Thorson beats Leach, is that mean that Burden is going to run against Thorson now, or is Burden going to commit to like letting like it's so stupid. It's actually kind of, I guess it's funny, you know.
It really is. I mean, I sort of maybe applaud Burden for getting a really early start.
Yeah, I guess that's really early. That's really early. Well, speaking of campaigns and people running for office, you know, I want to talk about grifters and these kind of, we call them career candidates, like candidates that are running as a campaign for career, right? You have a tweet out here that I think is just so brilliant, and I'm going to quote it for people that aren't watching, but it says, it's from you, and it says, "Grifters move to Texas, put on a cowboy hat, make some red meat tweets, claim they're running for office, and then rage bots will build their entire personality around supporting them." And the context there was regarding a discussion about Doc Pete Chambers, who's running for governor. What's have you followed his camp? Are you aware of him? Like, what's your thoughts there?
I'm aware of him. I haven't really followed him closely. I don't
think anybody notable has followed him closely. Yeah.
The article you wrote on him, I think, was the most I've ever read about him.
Yeah.
But I will say, I supported Don Huffines in his primary challenge 4 years ago to Greg Abbott. And as you noted in your article, I think between Alan West and Don Huffines, they spent millions of dollars against Greg Abbott. And I can tell you, I'm being in the middle of it, the grassroots anger at Greg Abbott, because this was very, very much right in the aftermath of COVID and the COVID lockdowns. The grassroots anger at Abbott was 10 times more palpable than it is now. And he still won with 2/3 of the vote in the primary.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, you had a multimillionaire former senator,
state
senator. You had a former congressman who was a vet, and you had a political celebrity, all running together against Greg Abbott, and they still couldn't trigger a primary.
Yeah, Chad Fraser was getting lots of online traction. How many votes did he get?
Right. I think he had the least of the three. Yeah. His campaign was more of a tour Texas to kind of meet women campaign. But you got Pete Chambers now, and he's a veteran and a doctor, quote unquote, and he's running a campaign, and he's been pretty, there's a lot of talk about him, obviously online support doesn't translate to real life support. But I had spoken to him, and we were talking about his campaign, and I was asking him about his status and his career serving in the military, and he's incredibly charismatic. I mean, the dude, I come from a background in sales, so I can kind of see through this stuff, but he's just like real smooth talker. You kind of almost can't help but smile while you're talking to him because he's just so charming, and just throwing out numbers and kind of vomiting dates and times and anecdotal remarks about things, and it's just kind of like a muddy of evidence, like verbal evidence of things. And then I was like, I was trying to pull up his finance report, And at the time, he didn't have one at all, which is not a good sign. When a candidate doesn't have as you know, when a candidate doesn't have a finance report, it either means they're irresponsible or they just haven't raised any money. And at the time, he said when I asked him about it, he said he had just filed. He hadn't filed yet, and he was going to pay a penalty for filing late. But he said we have raised. And this is Doc P. Chambers talking at the time. He told me we have raised just as much as Alan West has raised in his run for office. And Alan West had raised like over $1 million. And I said, Mr. Chambers, you're telling me you've raised over $1 million for your run already? It's been like a few months. And he goes, oh, I wasn't aware that he had raised $1 million. I'll take that back. I take that back. Well, we've raised a substantial amount of money, but most of it's in-kind donations. We raised about $400,000 in in-kind donations. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy is so full of it. And of course, like his recent finance report doesn't reflect any of that. Of course, he's raised, I think, I want to say like $35,000. But the online talk about him is pretty heavy. And there's a lot of these candidates, right? Chambers isn't the only one. We can go all day about these candidates that run for office. Why do you think Texas is so? And and admittingly, I don't watch other states. Why do you think Texas is such a grounds for people to move here and then announce their run for office and it be kind of fake?
Because we're big and it's a Republican state, and it's and actually I think they paved. I think they paved the way for. I mean, Brian Harrison is. I wouldn't say he's not a grifter. He's in a different category, but he's very much following in the footsteps. To where if you give people. There's a certain type of online rage bot to where if you give them something new every day, every hour to be outraged about, they will love you and build their whole personalities around you.
Yeah, people like being upset.
Yeah,
I discovered that when I worked for previous media outlets and other organizations. Like there's definitely a tool, and it's very effective in people being upset rather than happy. Yeah. And so there's definitely a political formula in constantly keeping a group of people angry about things rather than celebrating wins.
Yeah, and as I said, you put on a cowboy hat, you make some tweets, you start getting traction, and you start getting shares, and all of a sudden you have 100,000 followers or something.
Yeah,
and a lot of them don't even live in Texas.
Right. Yeah, that's also pretty funny. But speaking of Texas and scams, today when I reached out to you, I mentioned that I wanted to talk about you and I's favorite movement, which is the Texas Nationalist movement.
Yeah.
Very Texit, as some people would call it. It's a very serious movement that holds their meetings at Long John Silver's sometimes. In fact, we talked about this before, and I made a tweet about it. I actually went to Long John Silver's to get some food. It's funny. I got there and I went through the drive-thru and I sat there for like 7 minutes and nobody. I had to go inside because nobody was answering the drive-thru. And I walked in and it was like walking into like it almost felt apocalyptic. Like this, it looked like it hadn't been painted since the last time I'd been there.
Who was keeping them in business?
Clearly somebody. It took a long time to get my food and it took a long time to even place an order. In the maybe 15 minutes I was there, they had 2 customers, and it was lunchtime. It was 6:30, so it was dinner time. It was dinner time, peak dinner time. But they had 3, 4, 5. They had 6 people working, so clearly somebody's eating it. And it was very heavy. It was very fried. It tasted very American. It wasn't necessarily bad, but I don't see myself going back. But all that to say, less about Long John Silver's. This Texit movement is, speaking of like bots and people like raging out, it's another movement that's like very, very loud online, but it's a minority of viewers. I was looking at their YouTube page because they do these live shows every once in a while, and they'll get like 70 viewers. Like it's not a serious thing. And you've spoken pretty outwardly against it, and they've kind of come at you, I think, quite often, right?
Yeah, actually, they get a lot of engagement out of me.
You and I are keeping Texit alive, actually.
Yeah, we are.
By making fun of them.
But you're right. It is mostly an online movement. If you remember when they tried to get their secession question added to the primary ballot 2 years ago, they could not get like enough actual real signatures. They wanted to submit online signatures. And which is odd because this is a group that claim to have 600,000 members.
Yeah.
600,000. What they have is 600,000 social media impressions, but
Yeah.
they claim to have 600,000 members. Yet they couldn't even get a fraction of those for an online petition. Okay, but yes, it is mostly people online who are raging. 2 years ago they were raging about something else, and now they're raging about something else. And isn't it interesting? Trump's victory just totally took the wind out of those sails. To the extent that there was any wind in those sails, like it just totally disappeared.
It's funny you say that. I was on Tim Pool's show, Timcast, man, right before Trump had won. And they had me and Daniel Miller on at the same time, and we stayed at the same hotel. They picked us up. The way it works is they put you at a hotel and then they drive you to the studio in the morning. And so the car comes to pick me and Miller up, and I'm in the car with Miller, and we're just kind of like shooting the shit. He's friendly. He's really a nice guy. But I tell him, I'm like, Daniel, like, you realize your entire movement's going to shit when and if Trump wins. Like, nobody's going to want to secede from the United States if Donald Trump wins. Like, Trump winning is the absolute worst thing that can happen to you. And he was like dismissed it. He was like, blah blah blah. And of course, Trump won. And while we're talking here, I pulled up the Texas Nationalist Movement YouTube, and they do a live stream, a Q&A called Late Night Coffee Talk once a week. Mm-hmm. And their most recent one only had 240 views. To put that into context, I tweeted out a photo of me eating some Long John Silver's, and that has more than triple those amount of views as of an hour ago. So yeah, probably not a serious movement.
And I always believe that a lot of them secretly wanted Kamala Harris to win.
Of course,
yeah. In their calculus, it'll drive more people to support secession. Of course, I don't think they were correct. But this is a movement. I mean, to the extent that there's a lot of people who say they support Texit just because it's a way of showing a middle finger to the federal government.
Yeah,
the number of people who build their personalities around Texit, I think, and who are that, it is very small. It is very small, and it's getting smaller.
Yeah, they had some controversy recently when one of their, I don't know if they're former staff or current staff, I think she's former now, Morgan McComb, had sued Representative Jeff Leach for defamation because he said something to the effect of calling her a traitor or treasonous for supporting secession. And he sued her, or she sued him for defamation. And God bless Texas, we have some pretty good laws protecting about that stuff. And he ended up winning against her. And now she owes him lawyer's fees, and I think it's to the tune of like $100-something thousand.
I think $180,000.
Oh my gosh! Like, talk about stupid. And this was,
remember, the Texas National Movement. They were fundraising off this. They said, give us money. We're supporting this legal fight. Oh, they got all sorts of Twitter engagement, and fundraising off of this legal fight. And now this lawsuit that they were egging on, that it's like, are they going to pay Morgan McComb's $180,000 in the legal funds?
Yeah, all that money's going straight to Representative Leach's lawyers to buy a new boat or something.
No, the best part of it is, I don't know if you remember the attorney for, I don't remember his name.
For Morgan, what was his name? Is that what you're talking about?
The guy for the attorney for the Texas Nationalist Movement is Paul something.
Paul, shoot. God, I can't remember.
And the reason I bring this up, an absolute moron. And the reason I know he's a moron is because during 2 years ago when they were
Paul Davis,
yes. when RPT had rejected their application to have their referendum on the primary ballot, of course they sued RPT. And if you were following Paul's Twitter, at one point he tweeted, I just realized I filed my response in the wrong court. This is the court I need to respond in. He deleted the tweet immediately after because it really made him look incompetent. But these are the people who are who this movement is relying on. And if you want to know why, they're not getting very far.
Yeah, I've heard he skipped town. I heard he doesn't live in Texas anymore, or he's kind of skipped town because of some other stuff going on, and I'm not going to get into it. But I heard he has left Texas, and he's no longer practicing law here. He did the Texit, right? He did the Texit. He was living out of an RV for a while, I guess, traveling around the state or something, and then Yeah, he took off, fired up Texas lawyer,
Yeah.
and his Instagram is gone, so it doesn't exist anymore. I don't know if I guess if you're not really if you're not living in Texas, can you really be called fired up Texas lawyer? Maybe fired Texas lawyer is probably more accurate, but
And no, the Texas folks are really easy to dunk on, and I sometimes I feel bad doing it, but
yeah,
they really kind of make themselves a target. But in all seriousness, when I do have conversations, and what the some Texas people, not all of them, but some of them that I've talked to in person, they're very pleasant, they're very earnest.
yeah, absolutely.
And what I tell them is, instead of pursuing this, this quixotic thing that will never happen, like Texas has not even done 10% of the things we can do to assert our sovereignty within the federal constitutional system. Why aren't you working to elect the kind of conservatives to the state house who will do those things? And these are people who will tell you that Greg Abbott is a horrible tyrant, but who also want to create a separate nation where Greg Abbott will be president. And,
Yeah, I always ask them that. I'm like, so what happens here? Like, who becomes president of Texas?
and my serious advice to them, and I think at least to the ones who are serious, and not just raging online, elect better conservatives, and Texas will assert its sovereignty more in a federal constitutional system. But it's easier just to rage online.
It's not easier to be angry, that's for sure. Well, what's a hot race that you're keeping an eye on and that you've been watching closely coming up?
Oh, there are so many. This primary cycle is crazy.
I love it. Yeah.
The attorney general's race. That's what's interesting. If you saw the poll that came out, Chip Roy is far and ahead. Now,
Yeah.
Chip Roy gets so much social media hate, and I get it. I mean, he's very, Chip Roy like picks fights with Trump and all that, and I'm not a big fan of that. But he has high name ID. And a lot of people who only live online, where everyone hates Chip Roy, everyone hates Chip Roy if you're online, but he has name ID, and then you take the poll, and he's by far leading everyone else. And that's kind of a reality check for people. Online is not real life.
Well, they'll say the polls are fake. I spoke to several people that are very big on being anti-Chip Roy, very anti-Chip Roy, and they saw these polls and like, oh, it's fake news. It's not real. Not a real poll. But of course, when they see a poll that works in their favor, like, oh, that's a very real poll. It's a very real poll.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really interesting. There's this guy on Twitter named Amuse. He's a pretty big Twitter account, a local Dallas guy. Alexander Muse goes by Amuse on Twitter, and he had posted a tweet that got like 500,000 views, attributing a fake quote to Roy about something he claimed that Roy had said about President Trump, but in reality he had said it about Biden, Joe Biden, and falsely attributed it to being about Trump, which gave the appearance that Roy was talking against Trump. And it got 500,000 views. And I messaged him right away and I said, hey, this is inaccurate. Like, here's like several links proving that this is fake. Like, this happened during the Biden administration. Even so much so that I think he even put out a press release about the quote saying like, yeah, I was talking about Joe Biden. And Amy's just thumbs up, reacted my correction, and then never corrected the tweet.
Yeah.
And it's very suspicious to me. There's a lot of these, I'm not saying he's a paid account, but it is very odd that you're willing to lie for a candidate. And if you're not being paid to, it's kind of interesting as to why you're doing it.
Yeah. And again, if you only live online, everyone hates Chip Roy, and everyone is supporting Aaron Reitz.
Right.
But if you're talking to real primary voters, they're like, who's Aaron Reitz?
Right.
I'm supporting Mays Middleton, and I don't know how the race is going to shake out. There's going to be a lot of money spent by all the sides, but I can tell you it's not going to shake out online.
Yeah. It's kind of like the same people that I think it was, I'm not going to name names, but there was a gentleman that was constantly assuring me that so-and-so was going to win because they had more yard signs in his area. Like, oh, this person has so many yard signs. And I was like, oh, dude, yard signs do not equal votes. And then sure enough, it didn't play out that way.
Primaries are always a wake-up call for people who only live online.
Yeah.
There was an interesting poll just a few days ago that showed that 76% of primary voters were satisfied with the Republican legislature.
Right.
And that's a shock, because if you live online, you think, oh, well, every Republican, their lives revolve around hating Dustin Burrows.
Yeah.
But what you realize is that most primary voters don't even know who Dustin Burrows is. They may know who their state rep is, they may not. But if you ask them, are you satisfied with the Republican legislature? They said, yeah, well, Texas seems okay. It seems like an okay place to live in. So, yeah, I'm satisfied with the Republican legislature. Huge reality check for people who live online.
So on that note, would you say that the SREC then, or at least the precinct chairs, don't make up the plurality of representation of voters in Texas?
Well, precinct chairs and activists are by definition, not representative of the primary electorate. I mean, these are the most ideological people. It's not to say that there's a huge divide between them, because if you look at the ballot propositions that we put on the primary, that gets a good feel for how primary voters feel on issues. And on issues, they're pretty conservative. They're very pro-life, very pro-gun, very anti-tax. I mean, they're very ideological. They're very ideologically conservative. Primary voters are very conservative. However, their lives do not revolve around hating this or that state rep.
Right.
If you're online, and this is the crazy thing. Ken King is by far the most liberal state rep. Not just most liberal, he killed more conservative legislation by far than anyone else. But he never posts online. So he just kind of flies under the radar. Whereas if you're online, where everyone's lives revolve around hating Jeff Leach and Jared Patterson because they're always posting obnoxious things, you get a totally skewed perspective. So to answer your question, primary voters are very conservative. However, they don't share the same necessarily obsessions that precinct chairs and activists do. And good precinct chairs, good activists know this, because good precinct chairs and good activists block walk their precincts during the primary.
Right.
I do a lot of block walking during the primary, and it is a reality check. It's a big reality check. I'm not saying that precinct chairs are just irrelevant and that they don't, but good precinct chairs, the ones who actually work their precincts, understand that the sort of people who are always attending political meetings, like precinct chairs and activists, they don't necessarily reflect the average Trump voter who votes in the primary.
Would you say that also applies to SREC members?
Absolutely.
Interesting.
By far by SRE. I mean, we are not representative of Republican primary voters in general.
I had an SREC member tell me the exact opposite about a week ago, or maybe it was maybe it was Saturday.
Most primary voters have no idea who we are. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think they know what an SREC member is.
They don't know about RPT. They don't know. And that was the point I was also trying to make during the censure debate. And because, a lot of people, online, they don't like Trump's endorsements. And I don't agree with all his endorsements. But if you're an average typical primary voter, or a typical Trump voter, there were 6 million Trump voters in Texas. You don't know what RPT is. You don't know about censure. You don't know about Rule 44. You don't know who Dustin Burrows is. But you like Trump. And you expect that the Republican Party at all levels is going to work with Trump to advance his agenda and to keep the congressional majority. Again, the number of people who are, and I'm not defending what happened in the legislative session, because activists who follow the session and who are frustrated are right to be frustrated, but they also have to realize that simply raging online about your unhappiness with Dustin Burrows in the state house is not going to affect primaries. And SRECs, I think, who claim they speak I will say those who claim they speak for primary voters in saying we have to knock these people off the ballot are simply not living in reality. It is astonishing how out of touch some of them are. Especially those who kept insisting that this is what the grassroots demands. I speak for the grassroots, and I'm standing up for the grassroots. This is what the grassroots demands. Frankly, I don't think they speak for a majority of all the convention delegates, and I know they don't speak for the primary voters.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we're coming up on time. I appreciate you for hopping on. Where can people follow you best for your updates?
Follow me on Twitter. I don't even remember what my handle is on
You know
Twitter.
what? I'll help you out. I got it pulled
Yeah.
up here. Your Twitter handle is rdgarcia03
Yeah.
on X. So
Yes.
follow Rolando there. He's got a lot of fun, interesting, and hilarious takes on things, and you can also enjoy bashing on Texas nationalist movement. That's on there. You know, it's funny. Wasn't there this white woman recently that thought we were the same person, or she was mad at you, but she thought I was
Yes.
you?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes. It's like,
Clearly, as the viewers, you can see we look very much alike, so I can understand why.
yeah, yeah. All the
She would
Mexicans
make
are the
them.
same. And
Yeah, we're both brown. We're both brown. So yeah, all the
but
same
yes,
people.
follow me on X, and if you had been following me on X, you would not have been surprised by the outcome on Saturday. I was making all the same points, and again, I wasn't just popping off. I was sharing the concerns that I knew my colleagues shared because I've been talking to them. And if you had been following my X, you would not have been surprised.
Well, there you go, listeners. If you want to know what's going on or want a temperature check on how things are going to play out, you should follow Rolando Garcia on X. It's RD Garcia 03 and on Twitter. So thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I'm glad having you.